Hi everyone, how's it going? I'm back with
Hi. You're back
Daniel.
with Daniel Ahearn. How you doing? Good to see you.
This is episode 8. We're going with episode 8.
Okay.
In fact, we're filming this on the same day, but this one will be released a few episodes after the first one. We touched upon lots of amazing things, and I will be delving right back into my meditation practice.
Good. That's positive.
Thank you
I
for the
support it.
inspiration.
Yeah, totally. I think it's crucial.
I wanted to talk about therapy today.
Okay.
I feel like therapy in some social circles, it's quite taboo.
Mm-hmm.
There's a certain stigma when you say, oh, I'm in therapy, or my therapist, or my kids need to go to therapy. To be looked down upon. I certainly know when I first told my parents back home in Australia, oh, I have a therapist. They were like, oh, that's so LA.
Oh, wow.
And I remember feeling like my little child and a hit of sort of shame and embarrassment. And I very quickly tried to explain my way out of it. Oh, well, it's just a part of some of the things that I need to go through because I'm working on this role, and I just thought it'd be a really good opportunity for me to go and speak to a therapist. And
research.
It was research for a role, which was hilarious because none of that was true, and it was self-preservation, and I was in the moment, and I still remember the feeling. Let's talk about that. Why is there a stigma surrounding it? Why people should go to therapy? Why?
Yeah, totally. It's a great topic. I think, obviously, as we've talked about before, mental health is something that you work towards, and therapy is a way of working towards that. And therapy is a way towards working through things that have happened in the past and helping you work on things that you want to accomplish in the present and move towards in the future. I think, at least in our culture, we have a really terrible conceptualization around mental illness. We hold a lot of shame personally and culturally. It seems like you're saying, a slight to say that someone's in therapy. I mean, we do this with all forms of addiction as well. We look at these things as a moral failing or an ethical failing. And we have this idea in our culture that you have to do it by yourself. And if you haven't figured it out and you're not happy and you don't have all this stuff, you failed. And I would say that that's a terrible view to have. And it's unhelpful and unhealthy for all of us.
I feel most successful when I'm actually looking at myself, doing self-reflection work, and addressing any kinds of issues that are coming up and sort of manifesting in different ways. That's when I feel most successful.
When you're exploring life, when you're looking at what has meaning for you. So, life is not a one size fits all. And I think a lot of us benefit from therapy of looking at, well, okay, this is the life I was given. How's it going? What does it mean to me? By the time you get to an adult, or even in teen years, you've been told a lot of things about yourself, but you haven't lived them yet. And then you start to live them, and some of them may not line up according to cultural norms or media enhanced norms. And that can feel really lonely and terrible. So obviously I'm a big advocate of therapy.
And in case people didn't see our very first interview, do you want to just give a little bit of background? Is there a kind of therapist? Are there different kinds of therapists?
Absolutely. There's lots of different types of therapy to do. The type of therapy that I work in, the school of therapy I work in, is attachment and attachment repair. So it's attachment psychology.
Can you delve into that a little bit more? Like what attachment theory is?
Absolutely.
And I hear there are a few different types of attachment.
Yes, there are. So in the study of attachment psychology, there are different types of attachment styles, right? Basically, there's 4. And I'll tell you what they are. One is secure. That sounds pretty good, right? And then there's a couple of insecure. There's dismissive and preoccupied. And then there's one that's kind of the granddaddy of them all, which is disorganized. And the disorganized attachment.
Hi, noises. Hi again. Thank you.
Has aspects of both dismissive and preoccupied.
So, do you have any sort of examples of what perhaps some behavior would look like if you were, say, for instance, dismissive in your attachment?
I think I can do that really well. I think dismissive people are really, really good at exploring the world. they're not too good at relationships unless they go exactly the way they want. So these people can be very successful, right? Because they know how to navigate. But the issue with dismissive people, although they're successful, is internally they're suffering a lot. So the presentation is they're fine, I don't have time for relationships, they don't matter to me, but internally there's a lot of suffering, right? And this is the response to the fact that they were left to really raise themselves. There wasn't a lot of attunement, they had to figure it out on their own, so they have an early rendering of feeling like relationships are a waste of time. The preoccupied person is the opposite. The preoccupied person was constantly trying to get attention from the parent or the primary caregiver. The only way they could get their needs met is if they raised a fuss. So how does this show up? Maybe the kid is referred to as really needy or clingy. When it's appropriate for a child to be clinging to the parent, right? They have needs that should be addressed. But later on in life, preoccupied people are fraught with anxiety.
Oh dear.
They can feel really chaotic. It can be very draining to spend time with them. They'll often present problems and ask you to solve them, but they really don't want them solved. They like to have this ongoing problem. And again, a lot of this, just to be clear, is unconscious behavior.
Now tell me about this last one.
The
Well, there's also the
disorganized?
secure one, which
The
I
secure
was
one.
told I was secure, but
Oh.
I actually am not sure that. I think can you straddle too? Or not really?
You definitely can. You can be secure with some other qualities, right? You can have, or you can be dismissive or preoccupied with some secure features.
Interesting.
It's a spectrum, okay? It's
Yeah.
a spectrum, absolutely. So secure people tend to have really organized lives. They tend to have relationships that are stable. Most of our population, I mean, maybe those numbers have changed, would qualify as secure. And the other side you were talking about is disorganized, and disorganized people manifest both. So disorganized people will have a very approach and then withdrawal situation. So they'll come to you and then they'll be dismissive really quickly. It's very confusing. Their histories are populated with just explosive relationships. So it's probably not a surprise that a lot of people who struggle with addiction would be categorized as disorganized and also dismissive because of the relationship piece.
I'd love to segue now into sort of childhood trauma. I think we've been hearing a lot more about that. And it's interesting. I think there's like the conscious childhood trauma, the childhood trauma that really sticks out in your mind. You know, well, that was traumatic.
Like the headline.
Exactly. Exactly. And it was called micro traumas. And when I used to work with this amazing guy called George, and there was sort of your little traumas, and then there were your big traumas. And then there are also traumas that happen to you that you're not conscious of.
You're not tracking.
Yes.
Right, absolutely. So you're talking about George Haas from Meta Group, who I love.
He's amazing.
Profound teacher, heart teacher, incredible person. You should look him up. So there's capital T trauma and little t trauma, right?
That's it.
So big events that happen in our life, and then the little t trauma that kind of builds upon, that just kind of accumulates. And if we don't address it, it can build up, obviously. And attachment plays into this, right? So let's talk about traumatic experiences that happen in childhood. I think an important thing to mention is that our culture, in addition to having shame about therapy and shame about addiction, we often have shame about traumas, right? And there's an inordinate number of traumatic experiences that you can go through as a child. And as you come to understand this, if anyone's listening, none of these things are your fault. And you should find help immediately if you are discovering things that happened in your childhood that are causing behavior. I want to say. I think there's also an issue, just to put this out there, about mental health and mental health services. It's often really offered to privileged people, and that's something that as a culture we really need to change. Mental health should be democratized. It's as important as all other types of health, and it's really critical that we move towards that as a culture. People should be going to therapy.
100%. It should be celebrated.
Absolutely. So about childhood trauma, there are a number of childhood traumas that can happen. There's a thing called the ACE, which is a list of adverse childhood experiences that can affect your overall life. And we know for a fact that if people score highly on this list, the outcome of their life tends to be pretty dire.
Right. You mentioned to me earlier a particular technique that you practice and your teacher practices.
That's right.
IPF.
It's called IPF. It stands for Ideal Parent Figure Protocol. It was invented by, it's amazing. It was invented by Dr. Daniel P. Brown and David Elliott, and you should look them up. IPF is a type of therapy. It's a visual therapy where you're guided back into early childhood and you create two ideal parent figures through visualization. So you design them in a way that's meaningful for you, and you go back.
Taking that control back as well.
Yeah, and inviting in, noticing what your unmet needs are now from this position. So if I were to do it and I'm going back in childhood and I have a traumatic experience and I have these two ideal parent figures that I've created that are very safe for me and protecting me, in the guided visualization, I would go before the traumatic experience, right? It wouldn't go into the trauma. And I would have the ideal parents take care of me in a way that was meaningful to me. And by doing this practice, this therapy, over time, you begin to repair the internal working model and repair the attachment style. So literally, you just begin to see a completely different world. It's quite phenomenal.
I find it so fascinating.
Me too. I am turning my whole life towards it.
Wow.
I think it has great potential, and I really hope it picks up in this culture, because I think repairing attachment is a key piece. I think we often, as a culture, we want to treat the trauma and not the underlying attachment disturbance. So with addiction, we want to treat the addiction rather than what's going on underneath that causes the addiction, right? So working with a lot of addicts, it's not the substance, it's what kind of life are they having where that seems like a viable choice, consciously and unconsciously.
That sort of self-soothing through the
What's
substance.
The unmet need?
Yes.
And there's a lot of things in our culture that are focused on treating the symptom. And I think that IPF treats the root, and I find that incredibly exciting.
Yeah, that sort of sounds like a game changer.
Feels like one to me.
So we've got about 3 minutes left.
Okay.
For people watching who have all the feelings watching this, I just want you to tell them, what's that first step? If they are feeling excited by this conversation and it's something they want to explore.
Absolutely.
How do you find that right therapist?
Okay, right. So there's a lot of good resources out there to find therapists if you're interested. Obviously, I'm a big proponent of IPF, so I would look for that. There are a lot of beautiful, skilled practitioners. I live in Los Angeles who practice IPF. So you can look that up. Please look up Dr. Daniel P. Brown. You'll find a lot of resources there.
And you?
Oh, look at me. So my name's Daniel, and I have a website called Pathwork, PTHWRK.com, and you can find me there. And I'm happy to help you and direct you to other people if you want different help. And
Oh, thank you so much. My favorite person in all the land.
Thank you.
All right, guys, we hope that spoke to you, and excited to see you next week for the next episode.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.